Welcome, Negronis with Nord, episode 46, Dry January edition, number 3. We have 1 week left of what obviously has become damp January for me, but we are continuing to film with the Midwestern phenom that is LaCroix. I only drink lemon LaCroix. Lime's an acceptable substitute in a crunch or just plain, but everything else is honestly total trash. We were just talking about limoncello, which is like awful, and it's like really, isn't it weird? Water can be slimy. My fiance always says that Dasani is also slimy. You know, I think what they get right is the carbonation level is fucking perfect. It is the perfect amount of carbonation, very hard to replicate. Anyway, that's my LaCroix rant over. We'll be back to Negronis here in the next couple of weeks. I want to talk at the top of this about this Tarte trip. I saw the Barstool video going around that was kind of breaking down the costs of this trip, and they were like, this is so crazy. They're spending $20,000 for a flight, and they're putting them in these suites, and they're going to Dubai. And I saw a few people in influencer marketing talking about this, being like, yeah, this is a good breakdown of the costs of this trip. That's kind of crazy. If you don't think that they had a deal with Emirates and the Ritz-Carlton to be giving these people deals, how fucking daft are you? Obviously, they are not paying full price for that. They had huge influencers coming. They were either free or they got an enormous deal on those things. Also, Dubai generally just paid fucking Beyonce, $20 million? $32 million? What was it? Paid Beyonce $30 million to sing 5 songs. I am sure Dubai was involved in this and helping to probably offset some of the cost of that. All of that aside, I also don't think that people fully understand how much money some companies are making. Tarte's a private company, so we actually can't really know what they make or what their costs are. For public companies, you can. But, estimates out there around 120 million. Let's say they're making 120 million. That's what they made last year. They have 700 employees on LinkedIn. So let's say the average salary is $75,000. That nets out to about 50 million. So you still have $22 million of pure profit. Well, you've got an office and you've got things like that, but let's say you're at, 15 million on the low end of profit. Spending $500,000, even if they spend $500,000, even if they spent $1 million on a trip is not wildly unreasonable. Also, Tarte was had the number 2 best-selling affiliate product all of last year. So obviously influencer is working incredibly well for them. So why wouldn't they invest more in this stuff? I'm just gonna say, because the initial video that I think stirred up some of this controversy that I saw came from someone that worked at Barstool, I assume it has to do with sexism, and I assume it has to do with that degenerate fucking organization that I hate, and Dave Portnoy can fall off a fucking cliff and take his terrible, cheap, horrible watches and just go away into a hole and never come back. Amen. Thank you, Dave Portnoy. We hate you. Outside of all of that, I do think, beauty is a wildly profitable industry. It is why they spend so much. It's why beauty is one of the biggest drivers in the influencer space, not only because those products are generally under $100, they are something that you can kind of impulse buy in a way that you can't close or other things. But also the margins are just fucking great. They make an incredible amount of money. I would say 60% on the low end. Fragrance is 90%, right? I mean, they're selling water for $200. It's the best business in the world. It's absolutely incredible. But things like beauty, those things are not recession proof, but they are a little more resilient. Those are things that ultimately, even when money is tight, you feel going to Sephora, buying a few things, it feels good. It gives you that little hit of endorphins, but also it's something you're wearing every day, and so you're willing to invest in it. Beauty being such a driver of our business and of the influencer space in general, it gives us a little resiliency, even if there is a bit of a turn down. Speaking of spending a lot of money on advertising, Super Bowl season is coming up. The Super Bowl is the Super Bowl of advertising, right? I mean, it is where an enormous amount of money is spent. It is also tied up in, I think this is where you win awards. This is where you make your name as a CMO or as an agency leader. So there are a lot of factors outside of the pure performance of these ads. If it was just about the performance of these ads, it would not be as big of a deal because they don't perform incredibly well. It's about everything else that's kind of wrapped up in it. And honestly, it's kind of crazy to put an influencer in an ad. Influencers aren't actors. I think often the press is so quick to try and take one thing and compare it to everything else. But influencer is just its own thing. And the fact that sports stars and TV stars and musicians end up in commercials at a higher rate than influencers currently are doesn't mean that influencers aren't reaching some level of celebrity where they can be put in these ads. They absolutely are. The nature of what they do is so different than what a celebrity does or what an actor certainly does that it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to put them in the ad. They're not actors. Acting is hard. I have done hundreds of episodes of this show. I feel super comfortable sitting here and talking to y'all, talking about influencer marketing. If you handed me a script and had me read something and I had to act it out, I mean, one, I would be mortified. Being able to speak to somebody, being able to be your authentic self and be fun and engaging. Even if you look at an Alex Earl, who, I think she's super engaging and she's down to earth and she's funny and she seems fun and she's just being herself. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have an influencer commercial where the person is holding up a phone and pretending to be an influencer. I think they've tried a little bit of that, but it's just a little cringe. We need to resist the urge to try and take something and put it into some other bucket or, compare it to something else and try and poke holes in it and talk about why it's not important. I do think that is, there still is this simmering resentment in the mainstream media and traditional press around influencer. I think a lot of people in the press don't see what they do as legitimate. They certainly don't see it as hard or interesting. There is resentment because so much attention has been taken away from mainstream media and is being kind of absorbed by influencers. And that means, what do we say all the time in the show? Advertising follows attention, right? And so how are newspapers supported? Advertising. How are magazines supported? Advertising. If influencers are, taking the attention and thus the ad dollars away from your livelihood, yeah, you're probably not super keen to write glowing articles about how much you fucking love them and how you think this is such an interesting thing and it's so much better than, the way the world used to work. Of course you're not going to write that article. Nobody would. Y'all in this industry, you understand that. You know what's going on. And there's actually this interesting phenomenon that I don't remember the name of it exactly, but basically it says, if you understand something deeply, right? If I read an article about influencer marketing, I read it and I'm like, they are willfully misrepresenting what's happening and not understanding this industry completely, right? You know that because you are deeply involved in the industry. And of course, a reporter that hasn't been doing this for 10 years may not understand what's happening as much as I do, who has dedicated my adult life to this industry. The phenomenon is that we can understand that about our own industries, but then when we go and read something about another industry, we don't bring that same level of skepticism and scrutiny to it. This has absolutely nothing to do with the show, but is an interesting phenomenon as you start to understand sometimes what the power dynamics are, and especially inside of advertising, how everybody is fighting for these eyeballs and how valuable these eyeballs are, and then how certain things are being portrayed in the mainstream media, which does a huge amount to set the tone of how people generally perceive what is going on in the world. Again, it makes sense that there hasn't been a huge celebration around influencers. It is generally skepticism, dismissal, and outright fucking anger. It has been going on for 15 years. It's pretty boring, but I imagine it will continue in perpetuity. There are good actors in the space. There are people like, Taylor Lorenz, who's been on the show, who has been on this beat for years and doing a lot to bring awareness and legitimacy and support to what's going on in the influencer world. We had Phoebe Bain, who is on, who's been covering this beat. Ultimately, just how I think influencers should be integrated into the Super Bowl, and something that we have been pushing with our brands for some time. And honestly, it hasn't worked yet. Nobody's really caught on to it yet. People have dabbled in this, but ultimately influencers should be there to fan out and scale that message and take whatever the campaign message is that you are trying to portray in your ad and bring it into social and put their view on it and put their spin on it. I think one of the difficulties in this shift that we've talked about before from creatives to creators, right? That like a creative director in an agency comes up with an idea for an ad and they're like, boom, this is how to do it. They have trouble then handing over that creative control to influencers. They want to be really prescriptive about what you should do. That doesn't really work, but there are more brands who are running Super Bowl ads absolutely should be getting influencers to take that concept and to bring it to life on social. We'll be kind of tracking if that is happening this year. Unfortunately, we're not working on any of those campaigns, but I think we will over time start to see more and more of that. As TV viewership potentially goes down, what are we doing to kind of capture this moment? And while much of the country is still watching this game and they're on their phones if they're bored in the commercial breaks or whatever it might be, what are influencers doing to kind of bring those campaigns to life in social? Unfortunately, I think what we will see is a lot of ad buys where brands are just running those ads in your feeds. They're really proud of the creative. They paid a lot of money for it. So they're less likely to use influencers in that time because they've spent so much money to create these ads. They need to get the most use out of them. So I try and watch the football. I don't have cable and I don't like to go to Super Bowl parties. That's like, for me, like the two worst words in the English language are probably Super Bowl party. I actually haven't watched the game in a couple of years because I don't have cable and I don't even know how I would watch it, but I probably should. It's a big cultural event. I think it's worthwhile. I should, as somebody in advertising, I should be. So maybe this year we'll see. I feel like, if the Bengals get in, that would be kind of funny just because they've sucked for so long. And so it would be nice to see somebody who's sucked for a long time win. As always, ask us questions. We're doing a question. We're putting up a little ask. What is that box called? Yeah, our inbox is open. We're putting up the prompt to ask questions every week. Keep sending them in. We'll keep recording videos. We'll see you next week. I was actually doing a little bit of research on LaCroix recently. Obviously, I know that they, were this kind of sleepy Midwestern brand that blew up. It was actually created in the early 80s. And I'm doing this from memory, so who knows if I'll remember this whole story, but I was kind of interested in who owned it now. Created in the mid-'80s, somebody sold the company for, I think, $40 million in 1992. Sold it to this guy who was rolling up a couple of beverage companies. And initially it was supposed to be like a less snobby version of Perrier. Like when Perrier was popular in the early 80s, this was supposed to be like American Perrier. Never really took off. The new owner in like the in like 2010 or something, decided to rebrand it with like the crazy can. They'd had a bunch of different versions of it. This was the version that the creatives and the agency people didn't like. The owner loved it. They did a bunch of campaigns trying to get millennials to drink it, and it obviously blew up. It now owns 30% of the sparkling water market in the United States, and the owner is one of the richest men in America now. So pretty wild.